in that relationship. And this is done by plotting these terms A and B, and then B and C, plotting each of these terms from the suttas against the analysis of dharmas, mental and material phenomena that we find in the Abhidhamma system. So it's a very, very precise, detailed, systematic account of dependent origination. Whether the Buddha actually intended something as precise and specific and as detailed as that, I don't know. But it's quite, I would say, a fascinating and insightful system in itself. And so now we're going to be working through that dreadful and dreary treatise called the Visuddhimagga, that formidable treatise. And what I did is to highlight the most important passages, and then we'll look through these passages and I'll try to reformulate the scholastic language of the Visuddhimagga in normal, well, let's say semi-normal, intelligible English. So first we're coming to the first connection in dependent origination. This is avidya paccaya sankhara, ignorance as a condition for the volitional activities. I should add that I hope all of you received the day before the retreat started, or maybe 2 days, I had our office here send out to all of the registered participants a Word file that I had made up called Dependent Origination and Conditional Relations, in which I laid out these relations, I think, in a very clear and immediately accessible style. And so we'll be repeatedly referring to that file as well, because I think it makes the relationships clearer, I have to say, than as explained in the Visuddhimagga. But we'll look at the Visuddhimagga too. Okay, so here we have, let me expand this, increase the size. Is it visible in the back? Okay. So here we have ignorance as the condition for the sankharas, the volitional formations. And so first we have to find out what is ignorance. So according to the method of the suttas, ignorance is lack of knowledge about the Four Noble Truths. Lack of knowledge of suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path. And then according to the Abhidhamma method, or the definition of ignorance in the Abhidhamma, it says, and this is quoting the first book of the Abhidhamma called the Dhammasangani. So it raises the question, what is ignorance? It is unknowing about suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path, unknowing about the past, unknowing about the future, unknowing about the past and future together, unknowing about specific conditionality and conditionally arisen states. So what is meant here by not knowing about the past, about the future, and so on? So the Visuddhimagga elaborates and says, the bygone, or the 5 aggregates that have already passed away, are called the past. The 5 aggregates which have not arrived are called the future. Both of these taken together are called the past and the future. And both specific conditionality and conditionally arisen states together are called specific conditionality and conditionally arisen states. Yeah, I don't quite know what's meant by saying that ignorance is unknowing about the 5 aggregates of the past, since to eliminate ignorance doesn't mean that you automatically have recollection of the 5 aggregates of your past lives. It doesn't mean that you have a knowledge about your 5 aggregates when you were 2 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old. I mean, I have very few memories from that period. So I really don't quite know what's meant by this. Though in the suttas, when a meditator does the insight meditation on the 5 aggregates, meditating on the aggregates of non-self, they meditate like yang kinchi, rupang, atitan, agatang, pachupanang. So whatever material form there is, past, future, or present, all that material form should be seen as not mine, not I, not myself. And so perhaps it's not meant, what's meant here is not an actual memory of the past and by the future, not the ability to foresee what we will become later in this life when we get to be 60, 70, 80 years old. Actually, in my own case, that's memory of the past. And not being able to foresee the 5 aggregates one will acquire in one's future existences. So perhaps what is meant is just understanding the 5 aggregates from the perspective of being impermanent, dukkha, and not self. Not that one actually directly knows them through recollection, but one understands that whatever aggregates existed in the past were impermanent, dukkha, not self. Whatever aggregates will arise in the future will be impermanent, dukkha, non-self. That's the interpretation that seems most cogent to myself. And then what is meant here by specific conditionality is precisely dependent origination itself. We actually came across this word, this expression, I think on Friday night. So this is ida pachayata. So this is a combination of idang, this, as a condition, plus the abstract noun ending, ta. So it's the principle that whatever arises arises through its own specific conditions. So that is just another term for dependent origination. And then the conditionally arisen states, those are the states that arise through the force of the conditions. So in other words, according to the Abhidhamma definition of ignorance, ignorance includes lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the Four Noble Truths, lack of understanding that all the 5 aggregates, past, present, and future, are impermanent, dukkha, non-self, and lack of understanding of dependent origination in terms of the conditions and the dharmas, the phenomena that arise through those conditions. So this is ignorance in relation to the series of dependent origination, and ignorance in terms of the Abhidhamma scheme of mental factors, chaitasikas, is equated with delusion. But I would also say that delusion and even ignorance has, in my understanding, a wider application than is included in this definition. So I would say the most fundamental form of ignorance or delusion is not knowing the distinction between good and bad, the wholesome and the unwholesome. And what is unwholesome, what is wholesome. Not understanding that distinction in moral terms and not understanding that distinction in karmic terms, in terms of its ability to produce its results. And in fact, we see a basis for this in the Samaditi Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. This is Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 9, spoken by Sariputta. He's explaining what is right view. And the first type of right view is understanding the distinction of the wholesome and the unwholesome, and understanding the roots of the wholesome and the roots of the unwholesome. So that is right view according to Sariputta. And so we could say that one aspect of ignorance, well, that is one aspect of right view according to the Venerable Sariputta. And so we could say one aspect of ignorance is not having that right view, but not knowing the distinction of wholesome and unwholesome, not knowing the roots of the unwholesome and the roots of the wholesome. And so it's said that the function of ignorance here, in regard to all of these things, is that it keeps these things, the four noble truths, the past, future, and present, dependent origination, it keeps these things concealed and prevents their true individual functions and characteristics from being penetrated with knowledge. So ignorance is somewhat like a mist or a cloud. So when we're walking through maybe a forest in which there's a heavy mist, we can't see the trees, we can't see any dangerous animals along the path. Maybe we can't even see the path that we're walking on itself. So ignorance, we could say, has this concealing function. And ignorance, I would also say, has, I call this a projecting function. So ignorance, on the one hand, conceals the true nature of things, but also it projects distorted types of understanding. So the suttas speak again and again about four kinds of distortions or inversions which affect our perception, our thinking, and our views. The four distortions are taking what is impermanent to be permanent, taking what is dukkha, unsatisfactory, unsatisfying, to be a true source of pleasure, taking what is not self to be the self, and taking what is asubha, unattractive, not beautiful, taking it to be beautiful. And so so ignorance, we could say, is clouds over the mind. It casts a kind of mist over the mind. And sometimes that concealing function or that mist or cloud is said to be a kind of inner blindness. So ignorance, and especially in the suttas, we speak metaphorically, it speaks of ignorance as andhakara, a blindness or a darkness. And then ignorance also projects distorted, let's say the ignorance distorts our perception, our thinking, and our views so that we see things, reflect on things, and understand things incorrectly. Okay, so ignorance is the condition for sankharas, avijja paccaya sankhara. And so now we come to the explanation of sankharas. And so here, Venerable Nyanamoli used the word formations, but I would add volitional to make it clearer what is meant. Volitional formations are the six mentioned in brief above. So here, these two triads, sets of three, are taken from the suttas. So one triad is formations of merit, of demerit, and the imperturbable. We had these on Friday. So we have meritorious volitional formations, demeritorious, and the imperturbable. So these three kinds. And these are what are mentioned in the suttas, where the Buddha is explaining dependent origination. In one sutta, he mentions these three types. And the other set of three is in terms of the door of expression, the channel of expression. So here we have bodily formation, the bodily volitional formation, the verbal mental formation, and the purely mental volitional formation. And then these two sets of three intersect. So they're not three completely different sets. Okay, so we could say that maybe let's first take the triad beginning with the meritorious. I've lost my file. Okay, so the meritorious volitional formations would be 8 plus 5. So these are the volitions that occur in the sense sphere wholesome chittas. I think I might have them here. Okay, so here the conditioning state is ignorance. Okay, let's do it this way. Okay, the meritorious volitional formations would be the volition that occurs in the 8 sense sphere wholesome chittas. And it's useful to look at the table in the comprehensive manual. Let us get that table. I'm going to have to jump back and forth between the two files here. So we have 8 wholesome sense sphere chittas. These would be the chittas which have the either 2 beautiful roots or 3 beautiful roots. At the best, they have non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. If they're dissociated from knowledge, then there's non-greed, non-hatred. So those are the 8 sense sphere wholesome chittas. And then the 5 wholesome fine material sphere chittas. That is, these are the chittas of the 5 jhanas. So the volition in those 5 jhana chittas also are considered meritorious volitional formations. So it's the volition in these chittas. So these 8 plus 5 make 13 meritorious volitional formations. And the demeritorious volitional formations, these would be the volitions in the 12 unwholesome chittas. So we have the 12 unwholesome chittas. We have 8 rooted in greed. 4 of them also have wrong view. 2 rooted in hatred. And then the 2 in which delusion is prominent. One of these is the doubt citta, the mind filled with doubt. And the other is the restless citta, the citta overcome by agitation and restlessness. Okay, so those 12, the volitions in these 12 unwholesome chittas are the demeritorious volitional formations. And then the imperturbable volitional formations are the volitions in the 4 arupa, what we were using, immaterial sphere chittas. The jhana chittas are also called the fine material sphere chittas. Okay, so here we have 13 and 12, that's 25, and 4 makes 29. And so this is exactly what the Visuddhimagga says. Okay, then we have the other triad, bodily, verbal, and mental sankharas. Okay, so here the Visuddhimagga explains that the 8 sense sphere wholesome chittas and the 12 unwholesome volitions make 20. So those 20 chittas can, or the volition in those 20 chittas can become the bodily sankhara when they are expressed through the body. For example, I have an unwholesome citta of greed, and so that will lead me to steal. So when nobody is here, I see a nice recorder, I steal the recorder. So this is greed. The citta accompanied, rooted in greed, that volition of stealing, that is a bodily formation. Or somebody is attracted, the man is attracted to a married woman, and so he speaks to her nicely, builds up a relation with her, then has sexual relations with her. So that's the unwholesome volition of sexual misconduct expressed through a bodily action. Or somebody is overcome by hatred, and then they go out with a gun and start killing people. Again, bodily sankhara, expressing unwholesome chittas. Okay, on the other side, somebody has the wholesome chittas, and so a citta rooted, say, in non-greed, the person will give gifts to others, expressing the bodily, in a bodily way, the wholesome citta governed by the spirit of generosity, non-greed. Or somebody has a citta strongly rooted in non-hatred, coming as compassion, and so they will do something maybe to help an injured person or a sick person. And so this is a bodily expression of the volition rooted in non-hatred. Okay, or somebody has a strong tendency towards non-delusion, so they want to increase their wisdom, and so they'll go and get some books or websites on Dharma to study the Dharma. So this is bodily action, which is rooted in non-delusion. Okay, so these are wholesome and unwholesome volitions expressing through bodily, as bodily sankharas. And you could also see how they work through the verbal channel. The unwholesome citta, I get angry at somebody, I yell at them, or say something nasty to them that hurts their feelings. So that's a verbal sankhara, unwholesome verbal sankhara expressed through speech. Or I want to win some favor from somebody, and so with a scheming and cheating mind, I praise them or lie to them. And so that's a verbal sankhara rooted in an unwholesome citta. So that's verbal sankhara. And then that's in the unwholesome side. The wholesome side, somebody gives a Dharma talk, and so I want to encourage that person, so I praise them and say, you gave a good talk, you should continue to give Dharma talks. So this is sort of the congratulatory speech, wholesome speech, not intended to get some favor for myself, but to give encouragement to others. Or I want to encourage people to give, so I say you should give to help the poor. And so this is verbal sankhara, again motivated by wholesome cittas. So we could have the 12 unwholesome volitions, especially those rooted in greed and hatred, and the 8 sense-sphere wholesome cittas can manifest through body and speech, and also they can manifest just in the mind without coming to bodily and verbal expression. When I think unwholesome thoughts rooted in greed or in hatred, or I think wholesome thoughts rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So that's the mental sankhara. Those are thoughts or volitions that don't come to bodily and verbal expression. But then the volition in the 5 jhana cittas, those can only be the mental sankhara, because there's no bodily or verbal action involved in those cittas. Of course, when you sit, you take the meditation posture to go into jhana. But that is part of the preparatory stage for the jhana. So maybe that would be a wholesome, a bodily expression of the wholesome citta, sense-sphere citta, governed by the intention to enter the jhana. But when one is in the jhana itself, one is not regulating the posture. And so the 5 fine material sphere wholesome cittas and the 4 imperturbable cittas, or the volition in the 4 imperturbable cittas, those volitions are only the mental sankhara, not bodily and verbal sankhara. Because in the jhana, I'm not talking, not doing anything bodily, but just sitting there absorbed in this meditative state. Okay, then it said that, whoops. Okay, then continuing, so the Visuddhimagga says, all these sankharas, all these volitional formations have ignorance as their condition. And then all the 29 volitions are the mental formation when they arise in the mind door without originating either kind of expression by body or speech. Okay, then it raises the question, how can it be known that these sankharas have ignorance as their condition? Then it says, by the fact that they exist when ignorance exists. And then it gives some elaboration on this. So it says, when a knowing or ignorance of suffering is unabandoned in our minds, then owing first to our lack of knowledge of suffering, then we believe that the suffering in the round of rebirths is pleasant, and we embark upon the three kinds of sankharas, which are the cause of that suffering. So if we think that continuing as a human being will be pleasant, or getting reborn in the heavenly world or a fine material realm will be enjoyable, then we embark upon different volitional activities in order to achieve that aim. Then when one doesn't know about the origin of suffering, then one embarks upon volitional activities which are governed by craving, and craving is the origin of suffering. And we imagine that craving to be the cause or source of happiness, of pleasure. And then when we don't really understand the true cessation of suffering, we don't know Nibbana as the real cessation of suffering, then we think that one can reach the cessation of suffering in some particular destiny, some other realm of rebirth, such as the Brahma world. And so then one might, if one thinks that the Brahma world is the complete liberation, then one will develop the wholesome states, maybe the jhanas, in order to be reborn in the Brahma world, thinking that's liberation from suffering. Or if one thinks that like some of the predecessors of the Buddha, like the Buddha's first teachers, Alara Kalama, Uddaka Ramaputta, thought that the immaterial attainments were the states of liberation. And so the future Buddha, as a bodhisattva, he learned those meditations under his teachers, but then realized that they were not the true liberation from suffering. And then when one lacks understanding of the path to cessation, then one might engage in things like performing sacrifices. These were the things common during the Buddha's time, or self-mortification, expecting that this will be the path to liberation. Nowadays, I think people think that the end of suffering is to get as much wealth as one can, to have a big bank account, and then to use one's wealth to fully indulge in sense pleasures. So those are wrong understandings of the path to liberation. Okay, the Visuddhimagga goes on with more elaborations. We don't have to take all of those elaborations. Then it goes on to, this is where it brings in the 24 conditions that we discussed yesterday. So we jump over that. And now we come to the question is raised, how is ignorance a condition for the sankharas, bringing in these 24 conditions? And I'm not so sure that this works perfectly, but I'm going to, go through what the Visuddhimagga says anyway. And I think it's easier in the scheme that I laid out. I think we could see it more easily. Okay, so ignorance as a condition for the volitional formations. So here, what is the conditioning state? It's what is called in the formula ignorance, but in Abhidhamma terms, ignorance is the delusion, the mental factor of delusion, present in the 12 unwholesome chittas. Then the conditioned states are the sankharas, the volitional formations. And in the terms of the Abhidhamma, this is the volition in the 12 unwholesome chittas, which are called the deep meritorious formations, and the 17 mundane wholesome chittas. So these are the 13 meritorious, that's 8 of the sense sphere. Maybe just to make this clear, 8 sense sphere plus 5 of the fine material sphere. And the 4 imperturbable formations. Then what conditions are involved? And I'm going to do it first for the unwholesome volitions, since this is easier to see. And actually, I realized this morning as I was reflecting on this that there should be 2 subdivisions here across a gap of time by way of decisive support condition. Okay, so here I say across a gap of time by way of decisive support condition. So to illustrate this concretely, actually I use some of the illustrations already. Somebody has ignorance, and because of that ignorance, they don't understand the distinction of good and bad, the wholesome and the unwholesome. And so they think, maybe somebody thinks, getting as much wealth as possible is the source of true happiness. And out of that ignorance of the distinction of the true nature of happiness, they then go about cheating people, robbing people, deceptive business practices. Or we could even take some of the fossil fuel corporations, the executives, to maintain their profits over the decades. They knew about the risks of climate change and carbon emissions, but they spread disinformation and misinformation to deceive people about the consequences of using fossil fuels. So these, we could say, were actions generating unwholesome volitional formations rooted in ignorance, a distorted understanding of the true nature of happiness. And so first there comes the ignorance, and then that ignorance will motivate unwholesome actions. And on the other side, we could say, because of ignorance, again, about the distinction of good and bad, well, some people like to go out hunting, and so they go with their guns and shoot animals that they see. Even around here, during certain seasons, I hear bang, 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 and I know it's deer hunting season. And so this is unwholesome volitions of killing motivated by ignorance. And so the ignorance, we could say, comes first, and then people engage in these unwholesome actions because of the ignorance. So that's extended over a period of time. But in the same citta, here we have, and so here, this is, ignorance is the natural decisive support condition for those unwholesome volitions. So there's ignorance coming from, over a long time it's there, and then that ignorance generates or culminates in these unwholesome bodily and verbal actions, or even just in the unwholesome thoughts. Okay, then in the same citta, so this is where we have the unwholesome cittas in which there's delusion, and then we have the activities themselves as they're occurring. So we have in the hunter who's shooting, killing the animal, there's ignorance present in the mind that's pressing the trigger, in that cheetah that's pressing the trigger. Okay, so here we have the relationship between delusion and the volition, the unwholesome volition, present simultaneously. So delusion, we know, is one of the three unwholesome roots. So ignorance in that in that cheetah, ignorance is a root cause condition for the unwholesome volition of pressing the trigger or stealing some goods. And then the ignorance or delusion and the unwholesome volition are now arisen simultaneously. And so they are co-nascence condition, co-arisen condition. And then because they exist in the same cheetah, they're supporting each other. And so they're mutuality conditions. And then a lot of other conditions are involved here through the simultaneous, including, we could say, presence condition, because the ignorance and the unwholesome volition are present simultaneously. And we have the non-disappearance condition, that's number 24, which is just a synonym for the presence condition. And then as two mental states, ignorance and the unwholesome volition are associated with each other, so they're also related as association condition. So this is ignorance as a condition for the unwholesome volition. So we have two ways across time when past ignorance conditions present unwholesome volitional activity. And then as I'm engaged in that unwholesome activity, ignorance is present as well, along with the volition. And so in that case, they're root cause, co-nascence, mutuality conditions. Okay, then what's a bit problematic is how ignorance is a condition for wholesome volition of the meritorious kind. And I'll take as decisive support this one. It's a little bit questionable to me. Okay, but maybe the clearer one is how ignorance is a condition for the meritorious volitional activity. Okay, so somebody has the idea that it can't even be the right view, that they want to be, that they don't expect that they have the conditions for nirvana in this life. So, and then they consider the prospects for human existence seem a little grim. So they want to be reborn in heaven. So this is the aspiration for most of the followers of Christianity, and also most of the Buddhists in the Buddhist countries are aiming not for nirvana in this life, but the idea is to be reborn, either to get a good rebirth in the human realm or in the heavenly realms, and then to continue to develop their wholesome qualities till all of the factors are mature enough for liberation. And so, because of this ignorance about the unsatisfactory nature of samsara, one engages in various meritorious deeds like giving, observing precepts, performing maybe wholesome, good rituals and ceremonies with a wholesome mind to gain the merits that will lead to a wholesome, to a desirable rebirth in the heavenly realm. Or somebody thinks that the existence in the Brahma world is the final destination for humankind. And so with that ignorance, they develop the jhanas, creating the conditions for rebirth in the Brahma world. So that was the common practice during the Buddha's time, particularly in the followers of the Upanishads. So the ideal was to become one with Brahman, to make the Atman, the inner self, to realize its unity with Brahman, the absolute reality, the ultimate reality. And so on that basis, one develops these deep meditative absorptions, believing that that is the final goal. And on that basis, one then develops or obtains a fortunate rebirth, but it's not the final goal. So in this way, the ignorance about the nature of the final goal can become the condition for wholesome volitional activities, leading back either to a good rebirth in the human realm, to the heavenly realms, or to the fine material or immaterial realm. Let's see. Okay, any quick questions? We have 5 minutes till the break time. Okay, Paul.
Thank you. Just to take your example of the hunter,
Oh.
if the hunter's volition is not to kill the deer for the pleasure of killing the deer, but say to sustain the life of people who are starving or dependent upon deer, he has a good volition, but he's still killing. He has a good volition to support human life by killing the deer and feeding the deer to people. Is that meritorious or demeritorious?
I would have to say that even in killing the deer, it's a demeritorious volition because it's taking the life of a living being. But what I would say is that there's a difference in the weight of the volition in somebody who has to kill in order to survive and somebody who kills just because they enjoy the sport. Okay, Mark here.
Okay, that opened up a question that I had. What if the acquisition of wealth is the basis for the giving? So a little bit like the Middle Ages and Christianity, where there were with tithing, and lords would just do anything rapaciously to give the most possible to the church. It seems like that's more common than not nowadays. Okay,
actually first, when the Buddha is teaching at the practical level, the pragmatic level to his lay disciples, he encourages them to acquire wealth. It's one of sort of the mundane goods of life. And so he says that this is one of the things that the householder should aspire to. May I acquire wealth and be free from debt and so forth. So even though, that urge to acquire wealth might be, from the Abhidhammic perspective, rooted in greed, but in terms of serving as a basis, in fact, this is what the Buddha says, that this is the basis for doing good and meritorious deeds, is acquiring wealth. So then the Buddha will explain what are the worthy deeds that one does when one acquires wealth. You could find this if you want to find the sutta, Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, Sutta number 61, I think, and 62. I know this because I've referred to these suttas many times. It's not the case that I'm just picking it out of the blue. Yeah, wait, I haven't finished answering this question. Okay, so then the Buddha explains, he says that the householder should work diligently at an honest occupation to acquire wealth. Then with the wealth acquired, he should give and do meritorious deeds, as well as provide for the well-being of his family and household. And then what's left over, he practices giving and does meritorious deeds. Yeah, he should acquire the wealth by righteous means, by right livelihood. Okay, if it's a quick question, so you just have 1 minute to the break. If you think it's a complicated question. Okay, Marilyn? Yeah, take the microphone.
The table we were looking at, table 3, consciousness aggregates.
Wait, table?
Table number 3, the consciousness aggregates, where we were talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
the bodily sankharas and the mental sankharas.
Yeah.
What does DO stand for under profitable? Does it stand for dependent origination?
This table?
Table 3, consciousness aggregate. Looks like it's something that you sent out.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Let me look at this.
It says profitable, and the second column is unprofitable.
Yeah. Okay, table number 3. Oh, DO is ditto.
I'm sorry, is what?
Ditto.
Oh, ditto.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have to stop now for the break. So I think we have now, is it the 20-minute break? Yeah. So then we come back and continue at 10:20.